Carl, you've been a vegan for 5 or so years now. What's the reasoning behind that life choice?
Well, it all started off when I was training for a long-distance triathlon. I do a lot of endurance events, and I found that the only way I could get the fuel inside me was by eating more and more plant-based food. I was able to do those events, and I felt very good doing them, and I just felt better health-wise. There's for me, a definite health benefit. Thereafter, I began to look into a few more of the sort of ethical reasons behind it. But when I started to think about it even more, environmentally, economically, there were some very strong arguments behind adopting a plant-based lifestyle. But it was just this balance of me feeling just so much better in myself. I haven't had a day off ill for years. Now, I'm not sure whether one causes the other, but sample size of one, it did me the world of good. So it's a decision I've never regretted.
Could you expand a little bit on the environmental and the economical advantages of it?
I think what's fascinating is when you look at food production, we forget the fact that actually making meat, getting calories out of meat, is very inefficient. We as humans, we eat a lot of calories just to exist, not to build muscle. Same thing with every other animal. So it's about 25 calories have to go into a cow to produce 1 calorie that we can eat. So it's very inefficient. So I think we've got to look at ourselves and say, look, I'm not saying everybody stop eating meat, but we do as a race, we are now eating more and more meat. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's no longer a luxury. It's what people try and eat sometimes every mealtime. If we're going to eat that much meat, if we've got that many people becoming more affluent and choosing to eat meat, you've got to make decisions around the industrial production of meat. And that is not nice. When you look at how you produce meat on an industrial scale, it is not nice. So I think you have to think about alternative ways of doing things. So I think veganism, plant-based, I'm not telling everybody you've got to turn vegan, but I think people should look at what they eat. They should have more plant-based food. They should have less processed food. By all means have meat, but have less quantities of meat. Avoid processed meat. United Nations produced a study that showed that processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen. They recognise there's a cause between processed meat and cancer up there in the same category as uranium and nicotine. It is frightening, but people are thinking about this more and more. So cut down on your meat, have less processed food, eat more plants and vegetables.
There was a company that IPO'd recently that's both meat and dairy free in their products. Were you not tempted to invest in that one?
We're talking about Beyond Meat. No, Beyond Meat is a fascinating business. It came to the market, I think, at $25 and got as high as $235, $240 one day. Valuing it is really difficult. It's fascinating. The very fact that there was this investor appetite shows that people are interested in this technology. But it's not so difficult. I think there are lots of companies looking at ways of producing plant-based alternatives to try and get meat eaters thinking, I can have something different. I can make a choice today to have something different. The technology is getting better, but I'm not sure that the barriers to entry are always going to be there. It may be a first person past the post may get a better prize, but I'm not sure from an investor's point of view how easy it is to actually value these businesses. But it's definitely interesting, and the high-profile nature of that IPO shows how interesting investors are in this area.
And when it comes to researching the companies that you invest in, do you ask a question now about whether they have any vegan products? Is it a growing trend that you can do that, or is it still very nascent in its development?
It's definitely growing. When we see the big food producers, the Unilevers of this world, the Danones, they recognise the fact that there's a growing category there's a growing demand, and they have to try and satisfy that. You can't produce product without thinking that there may be a plant-based demand there. So we're definitely seeing that, and it will start to impact on what they do alongside other trends. These businesses are thinking about sustainability. They are thinking about their use of fossil fuels, their use of water. Plastic is the big one. And alongside that, if you are producing food, understanding that there's a plant-based say movement's the wrong word, but there's greater demand for these plant-based products. It's definitely feeding through into what they do.
And as a growing trend, we're likely to see a lot of innovation in the future. Is there anything you've heard of already that's in development?
Around plant-based, there are lots of different things. I mean, there are tech businesses in Israel that are looking at lab-grown meat, which we may all think, oh, that's really squeamish. But if you can grow meat in laboratory conditions, you're not going to have the animal cruelty. You're not going to be killing animals. You're also not going to be eating the nasties like salmonella. So I think that is definitely of interest. In addition, and these are very nascent technologies, I think one area that we may start to look at, which could be fascinating, is hydroponics and looking at different ways of growing vegetables, plants, salad leaves in water. In buildings, people are looking at using derelict buildings in inner cities to grow vegetables. That's a fascinating idea, to actually use our land better, use brownfield sites, use underground sites, tunnels to grow salad leaves. It's a fascinating area. There are lots of alternative ways of producing food that I think we as a planet are going to need to think about, because there are more of us, and as we get more affluent, you eat more food. And we can't all eat cows frolicking around in green fields. The industrial production of large quantities of meat takes up a lot of space. We've got to look at alternative ways of doing it.
Is there any type of food that tempts you back ever?
Oh, that's a sneaky question, Sam. Cheese is the kryptonite of a vegan. It's the one thing which, have a couple of glasses of wine too many, you have to edge away from the cheese board. No, cheese is the hard thing, but, genuinely, I've no desire now to eat meat or fish. I used to be a big meat eater. Not interested anymore. Eggs, no. I said, but cheese was the one difficult one.